all institutions connecting to social sciences and humanities to interact with the public in new ways. They can, for example, archives or libraries can advertise digitized collections. People can engage with music, with the fine arts, with museum exhibits in really new and creative ways, which is a really great thing because you reach a bigger public and audiences. On the downside of encroachment is, I think, social it seems social media is conducive to really superficial spread of information. Things like memes, tweets, TikTok, all very brief. And so they reduce the complexity of the social studies, social sciences, humanities, things like history, to really verbs. Ideas are kind of and then you have the situation where social media becomes a replacement for doing real research and reading. You just watch a YouTube video or something, and that is not really a replace. Even though some YouTube presenters may be really good, not a replacement for actually reading and research and interacting always with professional scholars. Does this make sense?
By the way, no? the quality of the speaker and in terms of the technology was not very good. It was coming in and out. It seems like there are some problems with technology, but I think we heard most part of the speech. But I wanted the moderator, in this case, the student Bonnie Hunter, to introduce each speaker also and have the questions so we can follow the format. And if you don't mind, I'm recording the event, so if anyone has a problem, just let me know so we can actually convert it and put it in YouTube. But with no further ado, let's let the moderator, Bonnie, to raise some question, and especially the big question for us today is why the humanities and the social sciences matter.
So first, can I introduce all of you guys? Okay. So Dr. Bird, she has a PhD in history. She lectures on revolutionary Europe to 1914, ancient history, world history, food and world history, and cultural history, and graduated from Florida State University. Dr. Williams earned his bachelor's in English from the University of California, master's in English creative writing from California State University, and his PhD in English from the University of Utah. We have Dr. Ramirez, lectures on sociology and focuses on women and gender studies. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in sociology from the University of North Georgia, her Master of Science degree in marriage and family therapy, and Doctor of Education degree in curriculum and instruction with a concentration in sociology from VSU, and also practices as a professional counselor in Valdosta, Georgia. Dr. Colavito teaches political science at Florida State College at Jacksonville. He did a TED Talk called The Future You and sponsors two clubs, the Politics and Rational Discourse Club and the Philosophy Club. They're designed to introduce contemporary social or political issues to an audience to stimulate active citizenship through rational discourse. I would just like to welcome you to our club and would like to remind the panelists that each question should be answered to 5 to 6 minutes and to expect a main question and a follow-up question. And for the audience, if there are any questions, if you could please ask those in the chat function, and the panelists, you can choose which questions to answer within your time slot. Now on with the questions. Dr. Bird, you gave a lovely speech on how social media encroaches on the social studies and humanities. I would have to agree with that, of course. Ms. Bird?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Yeah.
We hear you.
Yes. Okay. Did anybody have a question? Did everybody hear me? Because I'm having some trouble with the technology at my end. I keep getting things about a weak connection, and I think that's us at our house. Hello?
Yeah,
Everything is frozen up.
we're a little bit hard to hear. I think we cut.
Hello?
Hear me?
Oh, we hear you. We hear you. Is there, where's this chat?
I'm trying to talk to Melanie. I don't hear her.
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Melanie, we can hear you. So, yeah, anyone has any question, any comment for Dr. Bird in regards to this interesting proposal, right? That there are also, of course, problems with our new technologies, talking about technologies and YouTube videos replacing the work of scholars in the academic world. Any questions, comments, thoughts from anyone?
Steve has a question in the chat.
While we're looking at the chat, I do have a comment. People familiar with Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire's book, there's one small section in there where there's a group leader who wants to study the effect of alcoholism, what the people in the village think of alcoholism, and it comes up with an entire survey, shows the people in the village these pictures of people who are kind of alcoholics and in bad shape, ask them people what they think, thinking he was going to launch into a whole discussion about educating people about the horrors of alcoholism. And it turns out that most of the people in the village liked those people because they said they cared enough about their families to be depressed basically about the situation. So to them, the point I'm making is that the scholars, the people who supposedly know more, had an entirely different idea about what they thought was important than the actual people who lived in the villages. So my first thought when we were discussing social media was there is a democratization, I guess is the right term, of what knowledge is. And I see it, many of us probably see it in our classrooms, where people think that conversational style is good enough for academic research, which it's not. But I also think that one of the positives might very well be that the things that we think are important, maybe we can take some direction from people out there.
Oh, yes, I think that, the important thing is reaching new audiences and connecting to people, I think, in much more immediate and maybe more meaningful ways.
So Bonnie, yeah, you can go ahead.
I think we have a question in the chat. Did we already answer that?
I think. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello? We can
Hello?
hear you.
Oh, okay. Did you hear my comment about the benefit of social media definitely being reaching out and getting new audiences and connecting with them in more immediate ways? Which I think is a real plus, for the social sciences and for the humanities, because we can reach people that maybe wouldn't have heard of an historian, or maybe not thought it relevant to their life, or maybe not connect with a museum or a library or a place that they might find intimidating. Social media can make it less intimidating, so it brings more people into the experience. But I think people still have to understand that there is a degree of research and expertise that is beyond social media, that requires, in history particularly, the study of, and this is why history matters, of the study of using facts, finding factual data to make valid arguments, to understanding the complexity and the context, to questioning, evaluating, and interpreting. That's something that does require a degree of expertise that goes beyond what's easy to convey on social media. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. That kind of is, I guess, to the second question that you had asked me about, why is, history still relevant when we have all this information out there? History helps. It's more than just learning about the past. It's a whole discipline of learning about inquiry and systematic inquiry. And you can bring that to social media, but it takes beyond social media. You see what I mean?
So I think we have a question from Walter Parker.
Oh, yes?
He says, do the humanities still help us value different cultures, things like what goes into making a work of art and how history is made, and is that even important?
Yes, it's very important because it's all part of the human experience, and that's what the social sciences and the humanities do, is they make us think about, they show us how much importance we have attached, we have created in the way that we understand the human experience, whether it's through history or a work of art or drama or music, or the way we look at studying society, the way we look at studying with and engaging other cultures, the whole way we, think of our place in the world, and understand ourselves and other civilizations. It's all very much connected.
Can anyone jump in, or is this specific to different people?
Yeah, I think someone was raising their hand. I think it was Dr. Ramirez. So please go ahead.
Yeah, that was my same question too, Carl, if we were just bumping in or we're waiting for specific questions to be asked. I'll take the general question as well, like Dr. Bird, do the humanities still help us value different cultures? And I know coming from women's and gender studies and sociology and anthropology in our department, that's all we talk about. And I can't even begin to articulate the importance of culture in any job or career field as our students graduate and go into those professions, that this department, this college offers a foundation of understanding that's beyond a trade. It's just this kind of solid conceptualization, understanding, being able to know the correct pronouns, for example, of why that's important when you're talking with, say you're working in a business field as an HR specialist. You're going to have to not just mediate, but you're going to have to understand gender. You're going to have to understand race and ethnicity. And these are things that the humanities offer, and the social sciences that if that were eliminated from higher ed, I just don't even know how our society would really function.
That's so right. And history can fill in the backstory of why pronouns matter and why experiences of class or ethnicity or region or identity are important.
Can I add something? One of the early lessons, one of the early questions I ask in many of my classes is, does anyone raise your hand if you think society is perfect? And every now and then someone raises their hand, but most people don't. And then we say, okay, well, how do we improve it? How do we know in what direction to improve it? And what we finally realize is that we study humanities specifically, both social sciences as well, but humanities specifically, because we don't just look at what the brushstrokes were on a work of art or categorized, and this is chiaroscuro, this is, Rococo art, and here's what was going on. We ask ourselves, I frame it as world building skills. When you look at there's a painting in a museum, a local museum, and the painting is a World War I painting with skeleton faces and people in parasols and a beautiful parade. And if you walk by, you get the message. The message is a lot of these soldiers aren't going to return home. That's their simple message. But then you ask people, then why are these people in the audience dressed, in beautiful outfits and smiling with parasols? And you start to really build within inside yourself. And this is kind of my point. I always say you don't learn the humanities, you have to do them. You build the world that those people lived in, and you realize they're crushed inside. They're sending their loved ones off to war, but they don't want to cry, because then their loved ones would cry, and then they're not going to fight hard, and they have to go in. I mean, there's a whole lot more there. So if you don't think society is perfect, we have to have a mechanism for improving it. Now, we could just try stuff. You know, how does arsenic taste? Let's try it. I mean, that's silly sometimes. What we do is we see how all other human beings, you mentioned it earlier, how many human beings have encountered the world. A Gothic cathedral has the gargoyles on them. Why? I mean, yes, for the water, but also, you know, some people say they were afraid of evil spirits. Well, now we know something about these people. They lived in a world that had evil spirits in them. Maybe we don't believe there are evil spirits in the world, but we can tell by their actions. Their actions might be seen as rational if there really were evil spirits. So we can kind of connect with a lot of humans. And once you start having those world building skills, they're very forward looking. I have tons more, but again, I know there's a lot of people here who have things to say.
Marty, what do you think from the English perspective?
Well, I look at the end of that question and think back, and you know, what goes into making a work of art and how history is made, and is that even important? Yeah, and in some cases we would not know of anything's history unless we started working back through the art that remains. We know nothing of Etruscans except through their art, for example, and so we have to build history starting there. We can find other fragments, etc., and we can start to see a culture that's no longer with us except through those great works of art that remain. So it works in both directions, and you know, if only what's happening right now is important, then we don't learn anything from what's lost or what remains. And so these humanities processes, these humanities disciplines are really trying to connect all of these different aspects of human culture and history so that we know how we got here, but we don't know how we got here unless we look into the past. And not just history, but art, even oral tradition, oral culture, things passed down through that. And so it's just a matter of connectivity, and social media helps us with that in some ways. But again, we kind of can get lost in the bells and whistles, the pretty sparkly things, and they want us to. And you know, I was going to kind of touch on that when we get to my questions a little bit, but I'll stop there. But that's what I think about that question and what we're talking about right now.
These are all really good contributions. I think because, you know, history connects to everything, and it enriches everything, and everything enriches history. I mean, you know, when it comes down to it, being human is about the stories we create and tell. And history is one kind of storytelling. It's a kind that's, you know, based in facts and how we interpret and how we construct those facts. We make sense of our past, but that's obviously very valuable to human culture.
Absolutely.
How we use our past.
All good, very points. Thank you. Dr. Williams, would you like to answer the question? Can the humanities teach us to deal critically and logically with subjective, complex, and imperfect information?
It can, and it can also mislead us, and that's where it gets really kind of tricky. I mean, we look at the current situation in the Ukraine, and if you have been following what's going on and looking into it more deeply, you know that one of the things that Putin rests upon is the work of a particular philosopher. I don't remember his name. And so in that sense, you might think philosophy is therefore dangerous. Martin Heidegger was a Nazi. We have all these different aspects. You know, the Nazis loved Nietzsche. They didn't really read Nietzsche, but they loved his work because they read what they wanted to into it. And so this is the thing. The humanities give you skills to be persuasive. Sometimes to be persuasive means to pick and select things that lead people into, especially people who aren't interested in critical thinking, to become followers. And we see that all the time. We see that on Tucker Carlson. We see that on all these programs. These people are good at the humanities in a particular sense. The people who were following the Serbian genocide in Bosnia-Herzegovina were really following the work of a novelist. So, the point is, dangerous ideas are out there, and people with some skills can make cases to people who aren't going to think about them critically. That means that humanities education is more important because we have to understand how to think critically about those ideas, not to settle for the presented point of view, excised, set up, and merely received, and we have to interrogate these ideas. And the humanities is in a position to undo the worst of what can happen when somebody has a skill and misuses it. Does that make sense? So the humanities is a curse and a blessing, but the blessing comes from exposing people widely to the humanities in its investigatory sense, and it's not settling for a received idea. Because if we're doing that, then we can stop some of this manipulation that goes on so readily by fairly talented people, rhetoricians, etc., who know some skills and know how to push buttons and know how to take advantage of the people who haven't been exposed to a level of humanities education that will make them pause, investigate, interrogate, and come up with their own decision. People like to push us into this idea in academia that we're trying to push people in a particular direction, whether politically or otherwise. If I have a class of 30 students, I want to have 30 points of view, not one or two. And that only happens if those points of view are, each of these people is invested in interrogating, investigating, researching, and finding ideas that will challenge them, as well as reinforce their biases. You have to challenge yourself. And that's hard for some people to accept, but I hope that's what we do, and not in any particular direction, but in all directions. That's what we can do in the humanities to foster a greater connection among different people with different points of view, in my opinion. Does that begin to answer that question?
So, Dr. Calavito, you're from the social sciences. So can we get your perspective on why political science is important today?
I teach philosophy as well as political science, so I actually come at it from both. Why are the social sciences important? In general, because most people, as was just mentioned, and I couldn't disagree at all with that line, most people have biases, and we confirm our biases when we see things. For example, 100 years ago, a group of people comes from, as immigrates to the United States. They're uneducated, they're generally impoverished. Maybe they don't have the same manners as the local people. So people start to associate some prejudice with them. These people are like X. And that's obviously very poor social science thinking. So you do social sciences because you get the proper variables in mind, and you discipline your mind to be able to associate the proper variables. For example, again, sometimes we might have a prejudice with an ethnicity when it's actually the variable of socioeconomic status or something. The social sciences then allows us to see our own prejudices. It is fraught with some peril because depending upon what variables we look to, our own biases sometimes make it into the actual variables. A lot of models you'll hear about, modeling requires that you you think you know what's important into that, makeup. So I think a lot of voices, again, was mentioned, a lot of different voices is very, very important to identify, patterns and to catalog changes in society, help alert us to trends. Everyone's heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment and the Milgram Experiment, and these things helped us understand retrospectively, like how people might have done stuff. But I do believe, along with the humanities, that the social sciences can, if we allow them to, discipline our own minds. But we have to do it with people with whom we don't agree. That is the best way of helping us to find our own biases with lots and lots of voices. I couldn't disagree at all with that. I think that was phenomenal. One other quick example: 2 groups of immigrants come to the United States from different lands. One of them winds up having a $10,000 a year more salary than the other group on average. So we say, oh, maybe there's some discrimination against one group. But if you looked at some other variables, maybe one group, the average age was 29, and the other group, the average age was 41. Maybe one group came from an area that had a good education system or something, and it took time. So we need many social scientists to do lots and lots of research, and we all have to be kind of acquainted with lots of it. But I think for an undergrad or for younger people, it's really good to help us kind of see our own prejudices and see past our own biases, I guess.
So how do you think the humanities foster justice and equality? Anyone can answer this. I don't.
As a philosopher, I'd ask, what do you mean by justice? But that's half of the joke.
What would your definition of justice be?
I will not fall into that. We don't have 400 pages. But I wanted to add one thing, though, about a really quick thing about the humanities. I think humanities, I think the catalog of human experience is very important, and we hear discussions about high art and low art and the regular conversation and elevated conversation. I think there's something to that. Not that one's more important than the other, but there's something to that in the sense of, like, why do we have an educational system at all? And my answer to that, I think, is probably similar: to live well. I mean, if you're not doing this to live well, and part of that is certainly justice, then why are we doing this? And when you do, as I mentioned earlier, when you do humanities, you have a chance to test out human decisions before we make them. Like, if you had 20 boxes in front of you and someone told you there was a meal in each one of them, but you had no idea what they were, you don't really have a choice of 20 meals. You have a choice of 20 boxes. But if you can start to have some kind of understanding historically, or different cultural understandings, to get a sense of what this decision would be, an aesthetic sense, not just an intellectual, conceptual sense, then suddenly our decision to what we want to move toward: do we want to move toward a safer but more restrictive society? Do we want to move toward a more free but a little dangerous society? Do we want to have more concentrated power at the top to keep it? There are all different things that we have to kind of imagine living in. Otherwise, we're going down the path early, and it might be harder to get out of it later. So I think justice-wise, thinking ahead a little bit collectively could really help whatever we define justice as.
Well, and coming from a different perspective, but very right in line with that, I think that when you're talking about justice, or you're talking about this understanding of what our society means by that, as a mass, I think that our departments can really emphasize the difference between those who have and those who have not. And so, I think, just to follow up on Carl, that, privilege, we hear a lot about this right now, especially with legislation that just got passed in the Georgia legislation with, the Senate bill, House Bill 1084 with the supposed critical race theory situation in elementary schools and high schools. There's this kind of propaganda idea going around that somehow white people, white male, heterosexual, Protestant based, we're kind of not saying that's a bad thing, but you know what I mean, that kind of idea is the standard, and that is on attack, and I think what the humanities and social science can bring to students is this this story that kind of goes against that, this, I will say, a little T truth that kind of says, wait a minute, let's look at what's really going on. Let's take other perspectives into consideration, and let's not look at how this very small percentage of folks who have, the most investment in our capitalist society, who can kind of control so much, can kind of create that narrative for everybody to kind of think, oh, this is capital T truth reality. And I think we offer that different story, that counter story of saying, actually, most of us don't have that privilege. You just want to think you do because it feels good to be a part of the winning team. And so it always amazes me. I get the privilege of teaching introduction to social problems and introduction to women's and gender studies. And when we have these intro classes, students come in and they're from all different majors. And when we start talking about race and gender and human sexuality in these courses, you can see this, that look of what? Wait a minute, right? And y'all have all been there at some point, no matter how long ago it was when you took your first intro class in social sciences and humanities. And for some of those students, it's life-changing, right? Because then they can relate what we're studying, saying, hey, this is real, this happens. And oftentimes they correlate it to their own story, to their own journey, and realize, hey, wait, it's okay that I'm a different color, or I'm a different identity, or, I have a different sexual orientation. And I'm not this evil, terrible person that my church has told me, my whole life, or my parents have threatened to kick me out about. And I think that right there, it's a rich experience, not just on the personal level. And I'm getting all therapist on you, not at just the personal level. But you see these students develop through the years. They'll come back and they'll take your advanced classes, or they'll come back to grad school, or you'll see them in the community and they're doing great work. And it just came from that foundation. So justice, right? Well, you can go into a lot of fields in the social sciences and humanities. That bachelor's degree is just a foundation. You can go into professional schools, you can go to graduate schools and get your PhD, and do wonderful things. Or you can just do something great with that bachelor degree, as I've seen so many students do. So I think that helps bring some equity, so to speak, or equitable understanding to our communities when we have our students taking these classes or majoring in these departments. I think it's just really enlightening. To me, I get excited about it, and I'm a smiley person, and I just think that having this conversation to me today, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but why would we even consider not having the humanities and social sciences? That baffles me. But the legislation that just passed, baffles me as well. So thank you.
From a literature point of view, one of the ways we can address that is to let people speak for themselves. So I teach poetry. A lot of contemporary poetry is engaged in social justice issues. And so I teach a lot of those poets. And so from their voices, we hear about, as a white privileged, middle-aged male, I'm not the representative of, I'm the representative, of the problem, not the solution. But by bringing these other voices into class, I can let people hear what they're experiencing. Claudia Rankin, Reginald Dwayne Betts, the writing of Ocean Vuong. If you heard Fresh Air today, I don't know if any of you listened to that, but teaching his novel, and I've taught his poetry, and he writes from a queer Asian American perspective that otherwise probably wouldn't be heard. And so hearing that from his voice, from her voice, from their voices, and their voice, to use the singular, is important. And so trying to get works from these different people into the ears of my students is very important to me. And so in that way, I hope that's helping to address some of the social justice issues through the humanities. It's easy to preach, but to hear other people saying it from the experiential point of view is very important.
So we're hearing a lot about like trying to understand people through the humanities and social sciences, but can the humanities and social sciences teach you how to feel empathy or sympathy for other people's where they stand in our society? Can we relate to them in some way with how they write their poems and just
Well, the short answer is yes. That's the whole point, is to experience something that you haven't. That's why we read. I mean, even if it seems silly, if you want to fly off and go to Dumbledore or whatever, that kind of sense of pleasure, that's to create new experience in your life that you can't otherwise experience. So by looking at literature, we get a strong sense of that experience by living other lives. Like I heard this quote on the radio just the other, why would anybody just want to live one life? By reading, you could live so many different lives, and all of those lives can enrich you. So that's an important element of the humanities and what I do and why I write. So anyway, but I'll let you others go on because I've been talking a lot the last couple minutes.
So any response or addition to these wonderful observations by Dr. Williams?
I just shut down the whole.
No, I'll take it up, Cristobal. I was thinking as you were speaking, it was a wonderful thought that you were relaying. A lot of it was good, but the beginning about the different literatures and different actual experiences of different humans within new perspectives in literature. I was just thinking to myself, I don't even know if the question matters, so I'm kind of asking some of you all what you think. But are there standards of like what makes, if these are new genres of literature or like some things that haven't been evaluated or out there, how would we know what like a good one was? What does that even mean? Again, as a philosopher, I'm always I mean, when Bonnie asked the question originally, how would we get people to be more, what were the words you used? Sympathetic or more empathetic? Empathetic. My first question is always, why would we want to? I'm not saying we wouldn't. I'm not saying we shouldn't want to, but always, what is the goal first? And then, the ways that come afterwards. Obviously, I have some reasons, but how about just on the what is good literature in these different genres? How would we know if they're really this new? Is there like a benchmark or a way of telling, or is it really just a matter of perspectives that get articulated to people that may not have had them before in artistic ways?
It's an interesting question. I used to edit a literary magazine, and I did that for 5 years. And so I was one of the people who were selecting things that would be presented, and that's kind of how it starts. Now that we have social media, it's far more complicated. It's fast, and people have immediate access. I like to think that I'm open-minded. I've had to reassess my own biases in terms of what's good and what's not over, since my education. Because when I got educated, they said, this is what's good and this is what's not good. And then I discovered that some of the stuff that they were saying is not good.
Yeah, Marty, make sure that you get closer to the computer because the sound sometimes goes in and off, and we cannot hear you. We lost you in the last couple of seconds.
Can you hear me now? A little bit? Okay, yeah. I don't know if things were going so well. But what I said was just absolutely brilliant, and now I don't remember what it was. But What I was trying to say is that, you know, and I think I'm hearing some of that feedback come in. It might be from open mics, but what I was trying to say was you have to be open to revising what's good and what's not, your ideas of what's good and what's not, because it changes. I mean, initially, what's good is what I like. I mean, you know, I'm teaching a workshop in the fall. I haven't picked my books yet. I'm going to the LA Times Festival of Books in a couple weeks. I'm going to hear 40 poets reading their poems, and I'm probably going to pick some of those for my class in the fall because I heard them and they appealed to me and they liked them and they were interesting and they challenged me. And so that's kind of how it starts. It doesn't tell us what's going to remain in terms of 20 years from now, but as a contemporary literature specialist, that's not quite my interest. Some of it will remain, some of it will vanish. So that's how it is.
My bad. Sorry. Where am I? For Dr. Calavito, I have a question. How is rational discourse in the philosophies important today? I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just wondering, like, what is your response to that? Like, why do you like the philosophies?
I like them because a couple of things. I struggle with a lot of the things that we're talking about here in terms of I'll take a step back for a second. I have students in my class who I go out of my way to make the class, I don't know how to say it, not a safe space in the sense of like a place on campus, but I want people to be able to say what they want to say. And I want other people to listen to what they have to say. And then I want them to interact with each other. We don't do hug fests and we don't do attack sessions. We do say what you want to say. And, you know, I have several assignments. I'm getting to the answer. I'm sorry. I talk a lot and I have a big buildup usually. Several assignments are designed to have people go through self-reflective processes, and the classrooms design, we do exercises, which is designed for people to become comfortable with each other, just a little more. I don't force people to do anything they don't want to do, but I try to make it so that they can say what they want to say, because I think that's important. I want to know, and I want them to know. And I sometimes, we mentioned empathy before. There are some such beautiful humans in the classrooms that are hurting in so many ways. And it bothers me immensely as a decent human being, because it doesn't have to be. That's the part that bothers me. It doesn't have to be. And there are many methods of addressing it. The one that I'm very, very good at, if I say so myself, is the Socratic method and rational discourse. Now, by rational discourse, I do not mean to imply that there's only one way for people to interact or even gain knowledge or wisdom, but it is a very straightforward, maybe it's a left brain approach, I'm not sure, but it's an approach where people can articulate in concepts, not affects, but concepts, not percepts, but concepts. They can say what they want to say to an external world, because they have to deal with the external world. How they are internally is their humanity. How they interact with the external world is our society. There's not the same thing. There's obviously a reciprocal process, but not the same. So I try to cultivate just one aspect, which is that lane where people can conceptualize the things that they want to talk about in a language and be free to do so, and be free for people to, when I say question them on it, I don't mean question their decisions. I mean, question things so that they understand them. And I find that many people, I have a book coming out, and one of these sections is called Uncle Fester is the Only Good Kind of Fester. Anybody who's ever seen the Addams Family knows what I'm talking about. He's just a character. But what I mean by that is we let so many things fester that if we don't talk about them, they just get more diseased and more difficult to deal with and hurtful. And then we hate each other, and then we yell at each other, and then we scream and yell at each other. It's just not good. The Politics and Rational Discourse Club, of which I'm the advisor, it's the Party Club, PARDI. We our group gets to sit back for weeks and weeks and weeks, hours and hours and hours, and learn about each other, and vehemently argue sometimes, and then go and have coffee, and then come back. And that's what, when I talk about rational, I forgot the original question. It was something about rational discourse. Reiterate it.
Sorry. How is rational discourse in the philosophies important?
The general question, how is it important? People are important. That's why it's important. How it's important is that it does allow people to say the things they want to say without other people feeling attacked. I guess that's a good way to say it. Because the goal has to be, and this is a Freirean kind of view, if anyone's familiar again with Paulo Freire, the goal has to be, we share a common humanity. I don't agree with a lot of people on this panel, that panel, people down the hall. I have my own life. I have my own views, and I think I'm right. I know I'm not right about everything because I'm not perfect, but I know you're wrong about something too, whoever you are, whatever. But that's not relevant in the sense of our disciplines. Our disciplines are to try to work through that, and I understand that. So when you give people especially students who are learning it as they're growing up, when you give them an avenue to hash out some things without feeling attacked, and without actually not just putting up with stuff, but literally without feeling that way, where they can, it's like a sandbox. So when you have Canvas or other things, you have a sandbox where you can mess around a little bit and then back away. That's what I think it does for people. And I've seen over the decades I've been doing this, I've seen so many people who were 180 degrees apart, quipping at each other and digging each other in the wrong way, practicing some of this discourse and just learning a little bit about the other person's experience. Like usually people are fed up with the attacks that life gives them from a particular perspective, and then everyone else who piles on is an enemy. This allows us to see the other person as ignorant, or just they don't understand it. And if someone gets upset about something, you can say to them, why don't you just get over it? Or you can say to yourself, well, if they're upset, maybe they've been scraped and scrapped more than you have, and it really is, they are more sensitive to it than you are. Ask them. And then if they feel like they can, in a rational way, tell you what's going on, they may not be able to articulate it, so you help them articulate it. I think that's one of the keys. When someone gives you a point of view or an argument, you don't understand it, you just try to ask them about it. And if they can't articulate it, help them articulate it, even if it makes your previous view inferior or wrong or whatever. And that's, so how does it help? It helps because people have a safe way of communicating real things about themselves in I don't want to say non-judgmental, because we just don't judge, because we judge all the time, but we try not to judge on specious grounds, or we try not to judge, personal decisions and personal things. We try to judge. I mean, there are bad decisions. If we don't believe there are bad decisions in the world, then I don't know why we're not in academia. There are better and worse decisions that lead to, more peace, less peace, more, people eating, fewer people eating. So we try to make sure that there's a way of communicating those without damaging other humans who may in another context be damaged. I rambled. I'm so sorry. Please don't put this on the internet.
Can we get Dr. Ramirez's perspective on this? What do you think about inclusion and also just rational discourse among women in gender studies?
Well, coming from, a sociological foundation and an educational foundation, there are boundaries and there's structure that is just already within our society that keeps everything going, whether we like them or not. Kind of like what Carl is saying, we do judge, people make bad decisions, it's there, it happens. But where is the value in it? Like, what are we trying to get to? What is the goal? And I would have to say that within those boundaries, like, within the structure of society, and when we're kind of looking at those things, I think it's important that we pay attention to the differences that different folks and different communities bring to the table, and don't automatically take a view of, pretty much what Carl's saying, I'm right, you're not. That's one of the things I can't, it's very difficult. I just can't stand it. I don't know how to say that in a nice academic scholarly way. I just can't stand it. Where, the last couple of elections we've had, there's been so much hate and so much, all the way to each side, that there has been no opportunity for valued conversation at the table, regardless if I think you're a complete nut job, I mean, it doesn't matter. I want to kind of understand, or at least listen to what you have to say. And at the end of the day, I may still 100% disagree with you, but there's a way of having that conversation and being able to walk away from that table in a more refined and dignified way. And when we're talking about what does our departments offer for that, I think in our classrooms, we offer that kind of discourse. We offer that opportunity to have really tough conversations. I know, for example, in my sociology of gender class, when we're breaking down, the structure of, so yesterday, and I know this is going on YouTube, but whatever. Yesterday, we had a conversation about what is sex, like what is the definition of sex, that the verb, not the noun, the action of sex, and what counts as sex, what counts. And if Dr. Bird was here, she would probably say, well, it changes over time. Absolutely right. I mean, what we would count as sex maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago may not necessarily be what the students in my class today are counting as official sex. And what is official, right? So what does that mean? Most of the time, it'll just come right down to, how do you lose your virginity? So then we ask, well, what does it mean to be a virgin? And does it differentiate depending on if you identify as a woman or if you identify as a man? Or what if you are non-binary? What does that even mean when it comes to virginity and sex? So those are the conversations that, I would love to be having, downtown at, good coffee, with folks that maybe don't align themselves with my views, but having a conversation maybe politically that maybe just is kind of, what are we thinking here? What are we talking about? Why is it important that we don't pass legislation that takes books out of our children's hands? Let me understand where you're coming from on that. Just as much as we're having conversations about what constitutes the verb, the action of sex. And so those are the conversations that, we're having in many of our classrooms in different ways that gets you thinking, I mean, why buy into what your rabbi or your priest told you? This is what sex is and this is how it counts. You can consider that, and if you choose to go that route, okay, but that may not work for the person next door to you. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Are there any questions or anything to add from the audience or from the rest of the panelists?
I did want to put a word in before we left this topic for irrationality, because a lot of art comes from that, and that's how we kind of get new ideas. Thought my book is a book of poems, but I was responding a lot to Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein was interested in mystery, especially in the Tractatus, but he has a wonderful philosophical investigations, and they gave me fruitful ideas for poetry. Then you go back to the Surrealists and the Dadaists. New ideas come from irrationality as we grapple with them, because they are challenges. So that little note before we move on. Thanks.
Just real quick, as a point of recommendation, there's a book by A.C. Graham called Unreason Within Reason, Essays on the Outskirts of Rationality. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's got a whole listing of things that might be inspirational.
Thank you.
Any questions?
And by the way, I think we should allow any participant to just raise their voices, because the sound of your voice is very important if you bring any question or comment, so you can interact with any one of our panelists. But if you allow me to also raise maybe one question to all of you, will be the big thing for many parents and children is, or students in this case, is, can I make money with a degree in the humanities or in the social sciences? And the answer is, I leave it to you.
Well, sure. I mean, the creative writing is content creation. That's one of the most lucrative things going on right now. So, at the very basis of it, but also I worked in the computer industry, so I was a technical writer. So my skills translated very well into practical manufacturing software environment. So I was working at both ends of the spectrum in my own career. So it's not just teaching. There's a lot you can do out there with all these degrees: English, philosophy, social sciences, psychology. There's so much beyond just what we think of narrowly as being defined by those disciplinary titles. We're working in fields, not in narrow titles. And that gives us all kinds of skills to make money in different industries.
If I can if I can comment on that, you know, in our in the capstone class I teach for sociology, we have this conversation, and the one thing we do is we talk about how do you sell yourself to the American public or the international, you know, job market. How do you sell yourself? So we talk about research the job that you want to do, because in our field as a sociologist, you're going to there's one of many jobs you can go into. And you can go into education, you can go into HR, you can go into legal services, you know, social services, research. I mean, public relations. There's just so many different things you can do with a degree in sociology. But you turn in your resume, or you hand it to this person at the potential employer, they're going to say, well, what's a sociology degree? How does that apply to us? So the key, I would always say, with a degree in the social sciences is how do you sell yourself to your potential market? You've been equipped with great skills, great speaking skills. You know your stuff, right? You do research. You understand how to do qualitative research and data. You know, you can apply that. You've read and read and read anthologies after anthologies. You know these great writers. And so now you take that and you apply it and you figure out, you know, what are you going for? What's that goal? Going back to that, and you sell yourself. You use those great skills that you've accumulated in the program. And I've seen students here go off and have phenomenal jobs, you know, just because they do the research. You don't stop research just based on your paper. You take that research and you go to the market that you want and you sell your goods, right? And you make sure that you're interviewing those folks just as much as they're interviewing you. So you got to have that level of confidence. And I think that's what we do. We build that stuff up in our capstone and our internship courses, and we help prepare you to go out there to be that voice. Cory Booker, he's a senator of New Jersey, and I was listening to him speak in the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearing, confirmation stuff. And I was, he's a bachelor sociologist. He got a bachelor's degree in sociology. And I listened to him speak, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I know he went to law school. Let's forget Yale for a minute. But the point is that he has that degree in the social sciences, and look what he's doing. Whether you agree with what he does or not, the point is he's making meaningful change in our society. He's doing stuff, and he has a voice to do that. So I think how do you make money? It's really up to you, but it's taking the resources that your professors and your higher ed institution has equipped you with and knowing how to apply that going forward.
I've said two more things in general. I wasn't going to say anything, but now you got me inspired to say something. So I do agree with a lot of that. The humanities is, I mentioned earlier, it's forward-looking. The humanities, helps equip people to be visionaries, basically. As I said earlier, they're world-building skills. These are all the sum. You study literally what makes humans express themselves and what drives them and what their worlds are like. A little bit of a knowledge of that can go a long way as a visionary at any company. And in the social sciences, there are all kinds of wasted resources on specious claims or on correlations where there really isn't a causation. And the skills are very specific to delineate variables necessary to say what is actually causing what and to what extent and which variables are. And you can eliminate tons of waste. I mean, and those two things, any company, aside from all the things that all of us recognize about you humanly, having a better experience of the world with more internal faculties, but just as far as marketable skills, clearly marketable, both of them.
Thank you to all of you for your wonderful responses. Yeah, Bonnie, go ahead. I don't know if you have any other question left.
I do not. If anyone in the audience has a question, we can answer that. That's it from me. It was lovely having you guys here.
Kim has her hand up.
Yeah, and the storm is in our midst. I hope that some people will be safe when they travel, if they have to leave their offices or buildings. But yeah, it's getting very dark outside. But I think we have only a few more minutes. We can actually spend the last minutes for people in the audience. Any questions, comments, thoughts that you would like to share with our panelists?
I have a quick question. As a non-traditional student coming in, I just graduated from Valdosta State in May as a philosophy and religious studies major. And one thing that I noticed was that the humanities department seemed to be minimal as far as attendance, and especially when you got to the upper level courses. And I, of course, my biased opinion is that the humanities is crucial. As humans, we're humans. We have to learn to live with one another in this human world. But one of my questions to you is, how is it that we can create awareness and grow these departments and not lose them in our universities?
Kim, so this is probably not going to be the greatest answer, but every time, like, okay, so nothing against the Langdale Business School, but when you look at the amount of faculty that certain colleges have, right, go and look at donors to the institution, right? We are the one college, the one department that actually talks about the evils of capitalism. So I think lots of times they're like, we're the least favorite donor department, right? And unfortunately, unless our alumni go off and really market themselves and sell themselves right into the market and into their careers, and they come back and give back to their home institution, I think in many ways it's difficult to build it up, because then the question becomes, from a business perspective, how are we helping the university sustain itself as a profit industry? Because we kind of talk about things that usually, profitable industries may not want to hear about. Not that we're saying it's a bad thing, we just kind of talk about it from both sides. So that's kind of my short answer on that. The other gentleman may want to contribute to that.
I wish I had answers for you, Kim. I was going to put it on you, and you got to tell people how much better your life is because you went through this process. But yeah, the unfortunate institutional impetus is for us to make money, and most of us didn't get into this for that. So, and again, we start looking at business metrics and start imposing those on the university, and some of the cultural things are, in the U.S. University System of Georgia, I probably will, maybe I won't have a job tomorrow for saying this, but the University System of Georgia seems to be moving away from having an independent organization politically. With Sonny Perdue coming in from a political standpoint, and that's a real concern for us. Academic freedom is important, not because of my point of view, but because of all points of view. And it seems like one point of view is being imposed. At least we fear that. And so partly my hope is that we figure out ways to resist this and to grow, grow in the university despite the pressures against this open thinking.
I'm going to add my 2 cents, which would not be in contradiction, because those are answers that I would give roughly similar, even though I live in Florida. Minor differences, but I'll add to it. Has anybody ever heard of Buffy the Vampire Slayer? An old TV show? Sorry, I used to teach a course on fantastic series. But anyway, there was a line in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It says, "Don't give me song, give me something to sing about." And I love that because I don't. When we have events and we do things, I don't want people to get extra credit and a gold star and clap for them and be bored. I want to produce things that they want to come to. So part of my answer, again, not in distinction of the other answers, because I think those are substantially correct. But my answer is also partly students in the social world. They need to know, they need to want it. I mean, I'm not entirely sure people want to take the classics anymore. They're dead languages. I have text messaging. I have social media. There's a lot of value systems that maybe are more immediate. I call it the tyranny of the present, maybe. I'm not sure what else, but there's a lot of things that we don't, maybe it's the K through 12. I don't really know what it is. I don't have all the answers, but I think if we can make ourselves something that people want to do, more people would do it. And if people were taking these courses, I'm pretty sure some of the schools would be totally fine with having these departments. The political stuff and the business aspect, obviously, is, that's the direction it's been going. But in order to save some little corner, I think we simply have to get the word out. I mean, and somehow understand the new, new way people think. You've probably all read the research on how conversational style is kind of infecting academia, as we talked about earlier. And in a tweet, let's face it, you really can't get into a great deal of thought. So when people don't know that those thoughts are there, they don't know that they need to go take a class to access them, because they don't know they exist. So I think maybe the in addition to what's been said, the outward in, I mean, the students coming in, maybe we have to reach out to them in some different way. I don't think we need to sell. 2 cent story. My nephew, when he was very, very young, my sister will kill me for saying this probably, but when he was very, very young, he was a very good kid. He did all of his work as he was supposed to. One day he got called in because he wasn't handing some worksheet in. So the principal called up my sister and said, James isn't doing this work. So he came in. Some of you may have seen the story in one of my lectures, but he came in and they said, James, why aren't you doing these worksheets? And he said this. He said, well, these are handwriting sheets. And the teacher said if I filled out the whole sheet, she would give me a gold star. He said it seemed like a lot of work for the gold star, so I didn't do it. So, my sister said, well, it's not for the gold star. It's for, eye-hand coordination and being able to communicate. And after he understood that, he says, oh, okay. And then he did them all. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about this. If people understood the things that we've been talking about today, I think they'd want to take these courses.
So we are almost at the end of this session, but maybe we can have one last question or last comment.
I'm reading Steve's statement. What would Shakespeare's tweets have been like? To be or not to be? Isn't that a great tweet? You could have fun with that all day. That sounds like a new parlor game. If anybody knows what a parlor game is anymore.
So it's already almost 6:15, and we said that we will conclude the session at this time. So it has been a wonderful evening. By the way, I think the College of Humanities and Social Sciences is holding a very important also panel discussion soon, talking about academic freedom here at VSU. I think it's if I remember well, it's not a virtual meeting, but a face-to-face meeting. So you can look in our website and see when and who are speaking. But Bonnie, would you like to say something for each one of our professors and participants tonight before we leave?
My first time moderating. just thank you all for coming. Honestly, it was a good talk, a good discussion.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Cristobal, for organizing this. Thanks for all the audience and the participants that helped organize this event.
Yes, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
I retweet both of those.
Trending.
So thank you. I will be actually converting this into YouTube. If you don't mind, if you give me permission, I will do so very quickly, and hopefully anyone who would like to share this link, you can do so by just having the same title for the session in YouTube, and it will be available before the end of the week. So it has been a great event. Just be careful with the weather, and thank you to all the participants, professors and students and anyone else who came tonight for this wonderful panel discussion. And we will have one more event scheduled through our Philosophy and Religious Studies Club. It's coming in 2 weeks, and we have a former employee at VSU who is going to talk about the history of the Unitarian Universalist Church, some of their principles that they hold dearly, and what kind of programming or impact they have in the Valdosta local community and around the globe. So if you are interested, it's going to be also on a Tuesday from 5 to 6:15 p.m. and I will be sending also links probably a week prior to the event. But thank you very much, everyone. Be safe, and hopefully the tornado watch will be just a watch.
Yes.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.